We will go ahead and get started. Thank you guys so very much for joining us. This session is entitled How to Support Your Students During Social Unrest. And it is our hope that at the end of this session, you'll be able to take away some tangible tips and resources to really help you as you engage with your students during not only the current climate, but beyond this moment right now. My name is Denise Rose Barolotu, and I serve as the Director for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And I am actually going to let all of our conversationalists introduce themselves in just a moment. But before I do that, what I would like to do is just set the expectations of this particular program. So what we've decided is that this will be more of an informal conversation for the first 45 minutes, so that it really just kind of organically evolves into hearing perspectives from our students, as well as perspectives from those who serve our students. After that, once we get to about 2:45, what we'll do is introduce a framework that the Office of Diversity and Inclusion uses as we engage and encourage our students to continue to strive for success and also engage civically um, with the intent of attacking and ultimately defunding or getting rid of institutionalized inequities and systemic racism. So I will actually allow our conversationalists to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with our guest, Miss Debra Binkley Jackson.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Debra Binkley Jackson. I serve as the Director for Project Threshold Student Support Services Program at the University of Oklahoma. I have been there 20 years this year, and so I'm really honored to be able to participate in this conversation. Thank you.
I'm Liz Tabak, and I work as the Coordinator of Diversity Education in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion here at UCO, and I am super excited to be in such great company.
I guess I'll go next. My name is Kristen Coleman. I'm a junior international business student, minoring in banking and leadership at the University of Central Oklahoma. And I also serve as the student body vice president for the 2021 year. And I'm the past student body vice president for the 2019-2020 school year.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. And we will just kind of jump right into it. We do have a couple of questions to help guide us through the conversation, but we're also just, again, going to let it to allow it to mature just organically. And so I think the very first question is, within the ODI, Office of Diversity and Inclusion, we have had our students express a multitude of emotions regarding what is happening right now. So Christian, I would love for you to provide a perspective on what you're feeling, how you're feeling, and what this moment means for you.
Ooh, that's a loaded question. There's a lot of emotions and things. No, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's really, going through my head, or, someone who may be in my position. First of all, you want to make sure that, you're okay and that you're healthy. That's first things first, so dealing with, the outbreak and everything and people getting sick, that's a real concern. And then you start to think about, school, and you're like, dang, well, kind of felt like I lost a semester. Because I wasn't in class, I wasn't around my peers, didn't have any student orgs to, things like that to do. And then I feel as now that I'm an upperclassman, like it's starting to really get real. Like, will my internship be canceled? Will my job be canceled? I still have bills to pay for, and that's a real worry. And then obviously, we're young, and so our social lives are important to us as well. And adjusting to a new social life, in a sense, is different. I mean, we're used to being able to freely go on the weekend or during the week and, you know, do what you want to do. But now you're having to think, man, like, what if I go here? Is there a possibility or a chance that, you know, I could get sick or anything like that? So, I mean, it's just a full spectrum of uncertainty, to say the least, because you don't know what the new normal is going to look like, and you've adjusted and changed so much already. So it's just a time of uncertainty, a little bit, to be honest.
Well, and things look different and feel different, but at the same time, we feel like we've been here before, right? Can we, how do we feel about that? So it feels all different because of COVID-19 particularly, and the changes that that's brought to you. But we're trying to change the world now while we're social distancing, while we don't have access. Christian, Ms. Binkley Jackson, how do you all feel?
I'm going to kind of bounce off of Christian. Christian, I can tell that you're definitely not a freshman. I just got out of a meeting where at OU, I think like most universities across the country, we're trying to figure out how do we enter this phase in, as they're calling it, how do we execute these phase in moments. And one of the first thing, or the first thing that you mentioned was staying healthy. That students should really be concerned about staying healthy. Well, I think that just depends because, you know, given some of the feedback that we're getting from first-time freshmen who are coming in and having the opportunity to answer surveys, they want to be back on campus. They do not want to miss this freshman experience of being back on campus. Well, you know, I'm like, you can't be on campus if you're sick or dead. So it just,
You know, I mean, that's a tough one because when I mean, I think we've all been there. When the first time you get to campus or the first time you see something new, you're like, I don't want my first experience to be, quite frankly, watered down, you know, or half of what it should be. So I mean, I get where they're coming from. I do.
I think
But
when we talk about how to help students with this transition, because what we see, I'm also a licensed counselor, and
mhm.
there are lots of statistics that talk about how the numbers of mental health cases on college campus are on the rise. I maintain that they're not necessarily on the rise, they've just been hidden. A lot of times students get into college situations and they are being hit with stressors that they've never been hit before. So they've never met themselves in a depressed state. They've never had to deal with very high levels of anxiety. They've never had to deal with how the effects of not sleeping affects everything else until they see the fruition of how that plays out in grades. So I really maintain that. I think, you know, for years we've had issues with mental health challenges, behavioral health challenges, and we just have not been able to quantify those numbers. So all of these issues are relevant, but they're also what students are also having to contend with is the plethora of mixed messages from a national level and locally. How do you navigate? It's hard for adults, full grown, everybody been working for some years, adults, to manage this when the messages are so all over the map. Don't wear masks, do wear masks, doesn't matter whether if you wear masks, that you can drink bleach or not. Please don't. Anybody do not do that. So the messages are all over the place. It just doesn't stand a reason why the anxiety doesn't follow suit. So in this conversation, I think of helping our students stay aware of how to find a fit on a college campus that they may not have been on, as they're also navigating the space of, am I even going to be allowed to be on this campus? this is not easy work. It's not going to be easy for parents. It's not easy for counselors, for faculty. It's not easy for students like Christian, as a student that is trying to help students find their fit. And I wish that we had some answers, but I think that they're going to be changing. Those answers will change from the time we have this conversation until classes start back.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. It's interesting. I saw a meme the other day, and it said, "We know that you want answers, but we don't have anything. What we do know, we can't tell you, but we want you to make plans based on that." And I think that as we think about our students, and particularly those students of color, not only do they have to contend with the uncertainty of COVID-19, they also have to contend with living in America as a minority student, right? So every day that we turn on the TV or we scroll through our social media, I don't know who watches TV anymore, but as we scroll through our social media, we continue to be traumatized by the things that are happening, and our students even more so, right? Because they ingest and they divulge in that a little bit more. And I think that one of the ways that universities or university employees can help assist students is providing some type of direction on that COVID piece so that students have time to deal with and manage the social justice, dealing and engaging in trying to really compartmentalize and engage and be proactive on the racial justice piece to it. Just this week, we've seen an uptick in, unfortunately, Black and brown bodies being hung from trees, right? And so our students are having to actually look at that and process that while at the same time deal with summer school that's not being taught in a normal way. Deal with this idea that, okay, I'm going to have to be back on campus, but I don't even know how I can be back on campus. And the fact that essentially that collective support that so many of our students need may not be there, and it's not there.
And I would say, or go ahead, Liz. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and Ms. Binkley Jackson, you referred to this. This is not just today. This is layers. This is layers upon layers upon layers that we're trying to overcome to get to this place. We have a history of inequity. We have a history of lack of access. So as we're trying to create this change, it's just been so much to kind of dig into. And from your perspective, this isn't a single issue, right? So how do we dig in, and how do we give them some kind of support?
I think for me, a big thing about, I left the door open. A big thing about this time now is kind of a little bit of what you all mentioned. We're growing and we're developing in a time and in a space on campuses, in a community where things are not necessarily stable. And so someone who we can reason with, who we can process, who we can vent to, who can give us advice on when they were there at a certain period of time, who may have dealt with or understand where we are, those interactions, I feel, give a little more stability because it allows me to process, okay, this is where I am now. This is what's going on. This may be a solution. And when you have something to look forward to, or something to possibly hold on to in the future, that gives you a little more, certainty about, right now and moving forward through, you all mentioned a long list of stresses that we go through every day. And so I think, someone who, even if we are hard to
start those conversations, Christian. So you just mentioned like having someone who we can talk to. So I think that what a lot of our faculty and staff members are looking for is trying to figure out how to plug in with their students, right? And also plug in a way that they've never done it before. So if we're saying that what our students need is someone that they can really confide in, how do we help our faculty and staff members become that?
I mean, I think it's, maybe, I don't think it's maybe, I think it's setting a campus culture that it's okay for professors to, watch and get to know students and see if, they may be feeling stressed out, or maybe one day when they come in class, we have an open discussion. And I'm not saying that the professors need to necessarily know everything about you, but I believe that a professor who really cares about me learning their material that they teach will understand and see if I'm, one, adjusting to the material in a positive way, or if I'm having a tough time, that day, and you can tell because I'm not responding as I usually would. And I think in in an overall university system, if we want to put more value back into our students, who, we are the stakeholders of higher education, when you put a relationship against just a number and a kid in a seat, then I think that conversation, or that dialogue between student and faculty and staff can happen. But I think it's an overall campus culture that, quite frankly, the administration and faculty and or staff have to agree to. But it's going to be a mutual agreement between that party and the students, I think. And I mean, that's not a necessary, straight solution answer, but I think if we're looking at a general framework of what might work, I think that just has to happen.
Yeah. I don't know that there is just one answer, but I throw that out there because I think that I have so many conversations with others who are eager to be allies or eager to be advocates, and honestly and truly they just don't know how to engage. And so what I'm hearing you saying is it's as simple as saying, hey man, how you doing, and being genuine about it, right? My mind keeps going to this thought and this reality of performative allyship, right? So we have so many, and we've seen it, we've seen so many instances of people saying, yes, we are here for you, we hear our students, we are here, we absolutely believe in diversity, but then their actions are speaking a little bit louder than their words, right? And so for, if we talk about a faculty member, it could be something as simple as like, what type of curriculum are you teaching, right? Or are you actually paying attention to your students of color? Are you making them feel like they're that model minority, or are you genuinely engaging with them and not just having them do that, and forgive me, lack for a better term, that token. So when there's an issue of minority oppression or whatever, we're not just asking them about it. Miss Debra or Liz, do you guys have any thoughts about that?
I think particularly for our white counterparts who may be feeling the need to do something. Again, this is not new, and one of the places that I think education has disserviced the United States is not teaching truth to history. In some ways, our students would not be in the position of feeling like this is a new push towards a dream if we knew our history. Since before this country was colonized as a country, we have always had allies in a number of our civil rights strides, and that's not any different now. Listening is probably going to be one of the first, would certainly be the first thing on my list for any faculty of any color at any time. If there's a student that comes and just needs to talk, it's incredibly important to listen, to not just hear that somebody's talking, but listen. What is that student trying to convey in an emotional way that their word not be able to construct? Until education is truly a place where instructors, administrators, staff members feel that we serve students, not just our positions, not just our programs, that the students are first and foremost, that even if one's resume doesn't specifically say, I have to listen to students, that should come with the territory. That if you're a chemistry teacher, your job only is not to just teach chemistry. You are not teaching chemistry to inanimate objects. We are people, and that humanity in us has to really be what students resonate to. That a student who is in a chemistry class, that by whatever means felt something that drew them to that teacher, to be able to ask a question or relay feelings. If that instructor's response is, I'm not here to answer those types of questions, I'm not here to listen to those types of issues, I'm here to teach chemistry, then that student is being disserviced. I would like to think that particularly our higher education community is at a point where we realize that we have to be sensitive to those issues, and that teachers, whether they are tenured or not, have a responsibility to the same purpose that everyone does. That retention and recruitment is something that really has to be addressed across the board. That every single teacher, every single faculty, every single staff, every single student has a mission towards access, retention, and graduation. It's not just the responsibility of one office. So in that engagement, I think that to Christian's point about being able to talk with a teacher, they should be able to talk with any teacher and be heard. Everybody doesn't have to be the educator. And yes, there should be a plethora of materials and media sources where students can get that information. Every Black student, every student of color should not have to take on that educator role of educating everyone else. But everyone should certainly feel the responsibility of listening, of being a compassionate hearer of whatever a student, a faculty, or a staff is bringing.
Well, and that's, oh, I'm sorry, Denise.
No, go ahead.
And that's where we as faculty, non-Black faculty and staff really have to do our work, right? Because privilege is the normal setting on the dryer. So when we just knee-jerk through curriculum design or program design, and we are not being intentional, and we are not unlearning and relearning the stuff that we need to learn to deal with that, we can't move forward, right? We have to be aware, we have to be self-aware, and we have to be looking outwards, and as you said, listening, really hearing our students, and understanding that the bootstraps mentality is a lie, right? So I can't say, well, just get some sleep, eat right, and come to class, everything will be okay. That doesn't work that way. We need to educate ourselves and then do that digging, and then look around at the systems we have in place. How do we change that? How do we make sure that they're equitable? Look for those spaces. It's a lot of work, but those of us who are non-Black, we have the luxury and the privilege to say, I'm tired, I want to walk away from that. But we can't if we want change. And as you said, that's not the job of the ODI, or that's not the job of this. It is all of our job, because otherwise change doesn't happen.
Yeah, you guys, I think, are bringing some really good points. I have a question, and I'm going to lob it to you, Christian. Can you think about an experience or think about a time when you have engaged with someone, or someone has engaged with you and initiated a conversation with you, and it's made you feel comfortable and made you feel like, yes, this is someone that I can confide in. This is someone that I can have a conversation with.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could give a. I mean, I've had many professors in college that have done that, a couple. Um, but the one that I remember, and it's crazy because I don't remember a whole lot from when I was in elementary school. But I had this favorite teacher, and when it came to math, um, she would work with me, and she taught me this kind of square system where you can multiply your numbers across, and you don't need a calculator. Long multiplication, and she would teach me this, and over time she saw that I cared about it, and so she really got to know who I was and what I liked, and if I had a bad day or something, though I was a kid, that was a relationship built. And out of every, you know I've grown from fourth grade to a junior in college, and I remember that relationship, and because of that relationship, some way, somehow, I still remember how to do this little bitty formula trick that she taught me. And it's still helping me today. And I think that, especially when we're talking about higher education, um, whether that's, undergrad, master's, doctor's programs, we obviously have an interest in the programs that we're here for. And we're here for a reason because, there's a lot of money being paid for us to be here. If you can harness a relationship, a healthy relationship with the student who cares passionately and is passionate about a certain topic, the information that you try to teach that student, there may be some hiccups here and there, but that student is going to remember that relationship, and that relationship, not always, but sometimes, allows the student to receive and push a little bit further than they normally would. And especially during times like this, that is important because, I mean, I don't want to. I feel as if I'm pretty stable, but honestly, I'm an unstable being a 20-year-old in college, paying my bills. I'm not stable in where I want to be, and to go to a teacher, or every other day, or multiple times a week, and to constantly have that, you can't put a price on that, because that relationship or that memory is going to last far, beyond what we could ever imagine. And we would only hope that our faculty would rally behind, this ideology, because, I mean, it worked for me. Does it work for everybody? I don't know, but a lot of students who remember certain classes or teachers can, attest to this. And I think that that's a major portion of higher education that we could grow in. We're real people, and real people have emotions and feelings, and that's valid in the classroom just as much as the information that we need to learn.
I think you just mentioned something that is so powerful, and it is so much that, a lot of times we want, and I think about those who want to show that they support, like, we want to answer right now. Let me know what I can show right now. And it's not a right now thing, it's a gradual thing, right? So it's that relationship piece, and being able to build a relationship and being intentional about the relationships give that opportunity for when something like this happens, or as we engage in things like this, it automatically lends itself to the ability to be seen as an ally and as an advocate. It's not going to happen overnight, and I think that that is so powerful. Exactly, it's gradual, and I think that that's something that a lot of our peers and counterparts need to hear, that even though they might be just waking up to this issue, it's an issue that our students have lived with since they were born, and so just because they're waking up to it doesn't mean that a student has to automatically open themselves up to the good that that person is wanting to do. Doesn't mean that that person needs to stop or be discouraged in doing that good. It just means that it takes a little bit of work. And I think that that is really just kind of the motto, right? So when we're talking about attacking systemic racism and systemic inequities, especially in institutions of higher education, it takes work. And it's not a one-off conversation. It's not a one-off training. And certainly, I saw something that was beautiful, and it was like the revolution will not be diversity training. And I just want to put that out there because I think that that's so powerful. Like, we need fundamental change and not just this feel good because I sat in a 10-hour training. Now I know how to be an advocate and an ally for my student. It is intentionally waking up and deciding to engage, because our students intentionally wake up and decide that they are going to ignore all of the other things that really and honestly, if they gave it any thought, would stop them from going to class, even if they show up just a little bit late or turning in their work. They're intentionally ignoring that to engage in the education that we're trying to give them. So yeah, yeah. So there were a couple of other questions. Someone asked, if someone stops participating in class, what words are best to let the student know that you want to be someone that they can talk to and be an ally with? And yeah, so I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about that.
I mean, I would say that, you know, on the university side, I mean, it just depends. For me, it's if I have a mentor or someone around UCO that I'm close with, or that I can lean on and reach. But as far as, allies, that sounds more of like, it's already put in place and there's a relationship built there and there's an understanding. So I would assume that that's more so, a university side that you all might be able to, yeah.
I would tell you a story. So in all of everything that's happening, this is not a student perspective. This is just my perspective as to me. And there's a lot that's going on, right? And there's a lot that's asked of us as professionals, as students. And I think sometimes the simplest thing that you can do is ask someone how they're doing. And there was someone who I was really shocked had messaged me the other day and just like, hey, I'm just reaching out to see how you're doing. So if I would say if there's a student who you have noticed has a change in their behavior and their participation, I think you can ask, how are you doing? Like, just take them to the side and ask how you're doing. I don't know, Ms. Debra, if you have a different perspective, or Liz, if you have something you want to add to that.
Well, I think if there's a notice that a student has stopped participating in class, that's some very nonverbal communication. So I think that maybe to have that conversation with the student directly and let them know, I've noticed that you've stopped participating in class. That brings some personality, some personal buy-in into that conversation. I think that faculty are, a lot of faculty are subject to have this type of response, and the student may not necessarily even know why. There are lots of things that faculty will have to deal with. Conversations have arisen about white males dominating conversations. How many students will come back to an atmosphere where that's either the same, or whether that behavior is not being checked by an instructor that says that they want to be an ally? So if you have an instructor who says that they want to be an ally and they are still allowing that type of behavior to go on, then again, what they say and what they practice are two different things. So a student who may stop participating in class, generally that's going to be, there's a reason why. The student may choose to reveal that, but the one thing is for sure, if they're not asked about it, chances are that they will not. So a teacher who notices a student who is not participating in class and they allow that to go to continue. They don't engage themselves with the students. They don't bother to even ask why that might happen. Then that's probably a faculty that needs to check as to whether they really are an ally in this wave wave 410 movement towards social justice.
We just got a question, and it says sometimes the current issues need to be discussed by classes and students. In that this particular person has noted that sometimes there's a hardcore student who takes the side of police, as an example, and digs in. And either PLCs or person of color students shut down, or it becomes an unproductive argument. So what tips do you have for navigating these conversations in class?
I mean, I can say from a student's perspective, I've been in some of these conversations. Um, and I mean, as we are in higher education, I would think, or no, I would hope that when you have a conversation like that, a general basis or a general rule is, we're going to respect, the other side, or not the other side. We're going to respect someone else's opinion. First things first. They have the right to believe and feel how they want. But at the same time, you kind of want to keep the conversation. It's kind of hard to say healthy, but you don't want the conversation to go left or to go to right. You want both sides to be able to, talk their points, and eventually find a point where you can reflect and really dig down and understand why someone may feel away. And I would say, in order for the conversation to keep going, I would just try to, preach keeping an open mind and respecting each other. I think that's as simple as I could say that.
Well, and it goes back to those relationships, right? It's that facilitating those relationships. We need to facilitate those relationships with our students of color. But our non-Black students have a lot of questions, and we've seen it on social media. We've seen it. We've had the questions from our friends, and they've said things that are almost like when you're a child, when you're a parent of a small child who says something really inappropriate out in public. And so when the students come to us, or when our friends come to us and they say these things, a lot of times the shock is there. It's like, oh my goodness. But we have to unpack that. And especially as staff and faculty, we have to be there, and we have to unpack those questions for our non-Black students too, and create those spaces so that that's a teaching moment. That's one of those moments where they say something and you can really dig in and go, let's talk about this. Let's unpack this. Where does that come from? Because again, when normal is that setting, we go through and we say things that we have not put any thought into. So when we're facilitating, when we're working with students, if we can build the relationships before that classroom conversation happens, great. If not, then it's really showing that same love and respect and saying, we've got to, I've got work to do. And it may be even a mental note to say, okay, maybe that's a conversation. So
I think you kind of really hit it, Liz. I think it's effective facilitation, and I think that it's about feeling empowered to step in to provide that facilitation for both sides. These are conversations that we have all the time in ODI, especially with our Real Talk. So we have opposing views all the time, and it's about in feeling empowered to say, okay, I'm going to give you 1 minute to say what you have to say right now. Then I'm going to give this other side a minute to say what you have to say. And then you, as that neutral party, which hopefully you are, you're able to really just kind of reflect and offer reflection for both sides. Because essentially when those conversations get heated, what happens is we shut down, right? Those who are involved, and not just students, this is anyone who gets into a heated conversation, they shut down and they're no longer listening with the intent to learn, but they're listening with the intent to respond. And it's the onus is on the facilitator to ensure that it continues to be a learning moment.
I think for me, that's probably been one of the most frustrating points about the protests. Certainly being among some of those vulnerable populations in the COVID pack, that has been one of the most challenging parts for me, because this is an element I would love to be in the middle of. And I feel strongly that I've said before, you know, the magic of diversity conversations does not happen on the protest line. It happens through the dialogue. The dialogue is where the magic is made. Far too often in protests, people don't often hear what's being said at the podium. They are hearing what's being said among the people. That's where dialogue is happening. And there are extremes on both ends of those perspectives, law enforcement perspectives and within our regular citizenry. And I maintain that stereotyping by either group at any time for any reason is oppression. Oppression by any group is wrong. So we're going to have that, but I also maintain that groups like these medium or these central groups are groups where that those extremists on both sides can be squeezed out. That the heads of reason can insist on conversation and not yelling, because yelling gets nothing accomplished. But we have to take off the table that this is not an emotional issue. It's going to be, but only within that conversation to move towards dialogue can often be prompted by protests. But conversations are not being held among protests. A point is being made. And as we've seen in so many instances, the protests have led towards civilized dialogue, conversations. That's where change can be addressed. So I think for faculty or staff anywhere, but particularly on a college campus, we should be drivers of how civilized, respectful dialogue can happen. You know, Denis, you mentioned about the conversations that people have with themselves, and I've said before, you know, if you're actively listening to someone, but you're having that conversation with yourself while you're hearing someone else talk, oh, when they get done, this is what I'm about to tell them, and oh, I'm gonna really let them have it. You haven't been able to hear them because you were listening to another conversation. It was the one that was going on in your head, but you did not hear, you weren't able to really hear what the other person was saying. And those are really important tools that all of us have to be willing to bring to this table right now.
Right, right. So we have someone asking a question about being a neutral facilitator. And essentially, as much as we may try to be neutral, we have feelings and thoughts about certain subjects. And so the question is it okay to let students know how I am personally feeling about whatever issue is up for debate or up for conversation? I don't know what you guys' thoughts are about that.
I think that's a really tough one. Just because, I mean, you want to be authentic, but you know, if the authentic you know, is, I don't want to say problematic, but if it's, I don't know the right word to put on that, but I think you all get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if the authentic you isn't
not
you're
conducive
supposed
to yeah, go ahead.
right, yeah, and if it doesn't align with you being a mutual party in this conversation, then it's hard for that conversation to happen, and for both parties and yourself to leave that conversation with something worth value. Because if you're already one-sided, and students, to a student, myself, I will have a conversation with the professor. And, if we're there's dialogue and, this is your point, this is my point, I'll do that. But in the instance that we're having a discussion, like, and we're talking about an important issue, and my professor takes the other side, automatically off top, I'm looking like, wow, like there's no way. I'm not gonna say there's no way I could win, but why would I have this conversation, or why would we do this? Just for everything my classmates to say to be backed up or validated by the professional, And in a sense, that may seem wrong, but I think if we want to have these type of conversations, there's going to be a give and a pull and a give and a pull, and so that we can kind of work our way into, having these. But initially, if the professor's like, I'm not changing my ways, I'm stuck, you know, that then hinders the rest of the class from either being able to hear that view or also, to state theirs. And before I also, somebody typed a question in the question response about international student and their resources during this time, and I didn't want it to get passed up. So if we can put that in there eventually somewhere.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
I want to talk just a little bit about the neutral facilitator. I think it's completely fine if you're not neutral. I think the issue becomes when you intend to drive the conversation one way or the other, just as you were saying, Christian. So if you're able to have your opinion, but provide still those challenging questions to both sides, so it's not leaning one way or the other. And I think that it is completely fair to say, in all honesty, these are my thoughts, but you have to be open to listening to that other side and not creating really just a more or creating somewhat an environment, like you said, Christian, where the students don't feel like they can truly give their opinions and their sides if it opposes the professor's side. And I think that that's why there's been such a huge kind of scrutiny on institutions of higher education, right? Because there's been a history of certain leaning professionals in actually imparting or pushing their agenda per se onto their students instead of allowing those students the freedom to really cultivate their own decision.
Well, and it's a dance, right, Denise? Because we're in this because we're invested. We're in this because we care. And sometimes taking that step back and going, okay, this is for our students. This is a learning moment for them. So kind of, I know how I feel and I know what my perspective is, but how do I kind of put that, I don't want to say put it aside, but don't focus on me and focus on you and focus on you and make sure that we're creating some growth. Because I know that I can come out of class and maybe come and talk to you or talk to some of my other friends and have those conversations and say, boy, I really felt irritated, or I felt riled up, or I feel strong about something. But then you have that moment right there as you're facilitating class to hopefully get people to a different level and understanding. And you can use that the way that you feel. You can use your passion, you can use your belief and really catalyze right then, because now it's not just you're making a difference in somebody else's life. You're opening a door, or you're shining that light on for them. And that's the really cool stuff, right?
I'm going to say this because there's a question, and we're going to take about 3 minutes to answer it. For the question that is asking about support services for our international students, what I'll do is actually send out a list of resources to the attendees list, because I do think that that is so important for our international students to be able to engage and feel supported as well. There's a question that I think I would like to hear an answer for really quickly. This is when I have a diverse group of students in my class, I find that dialogue goes well and I can keep the conversations respectful. I'm more concerned about having these conversations when my class is less diverse, when the overwhelming majority is white. I don't want the few POCs to feel singled out or like they are obligated to talk just because they're POC. Are there any suggestions for that type of situation?
I'm a big talker when it comes to class discussions, and I think the healthiest discussions come from laying down a basis of what we're going to tolerate and what we're not going to tolerate. We're going to tolerate, you being able to speak your views, but we're not going to tolerate you talking down or belittling another group. That's what we're not going to do. And we're also going to set a basis. If you feel comfortable enough to speak in this conversation, by all means, speak. If not, then we respect your decision and listen, actively in the discussion. For me, when a discussion is laid out and those are the confines that we're going to work within for this discussion, I then understand if this is something that I'm going to partake in, and most likely for me it is. But, for some people who are like, I'm cool, this is not, then that's comfortable and everybody knows. So I just think, letting it be known from the jump, what you're going to accept and what you're not going to accept. And, really push to see both sides and, really try to make them reason on the other side if they're one way. That's just my opinion.
Ms. Debra, Chris, do you have anything that you want to add?
I think most syllabi incorporate academic integrity and class conduct policies that are in the syllabi these days. What very often happens, particularly if there's a concern like this, is where those policies, those statements have not been put into true practice. A respectful conversation and discourse that we want to maybe we've symbolically, if you will, called it's just escaped me now, civilized dialogue, in that vein of showing our students, because I think for all faculty, that's really what it comes back to. You have an opportunity to show your students how civilized discourse can happen. It doesn't have to lose its emotionality. It doesn't have to lose the emphasis of how severe people are impacted by all of these social constructs. And I think, to the point about the international students seeking help, this is Black Lives Matter has clearly turned into international. And it's just been astounding to watch. And I think, again, that's something that in that social needle movement that I have not witnessed before, the globalness of this slogan, this statement, this feeling that Black lives matter, that no matter what happens, Black people, your lives do matter, because that's where this really originated from. But I think if an instructor is not honest about, maybe some of those fears, and to Christian's point about what they expect, that the civility of our conversations. And for a lot of students, particularly our Generation Zers, they may not have been able to see a lot of that because of social media, because of how people just are not willing to be courteous anymore, or maybe never learned it in the first place. This is an opportunity for that to be seen in a classroom setting, that we can agree to disagree, but all of the points have been heard. The conversations about white privilege would not come up if somebody had not said, these are privileges that you get, and white people were like, oh, really? It is? I wasn't aware of that. So now that conversation can be had. There are white privilege conferences that are, yes, that's a thing, that are held because these conversations came to fruition. So I think that everyone has to be okay. My constant statement is, part of what we have to be comfortable with, people from that are really invested in these types of conversations, is that we have to be comfortable with our positions of being uncomfortable. That's how we're going to be able to grow. And it's not something that we can avoid, because we don't want to make people uncomfortable, or we want to keep comfort as part of the class standard. If we're going to have these discussions, we have to understand that people are going to be uncomfortable. That's how social change happens. You can change policies, you can change laws, you can try to change practices, but you cannot change people's hearts. And very often that dialogue is the first way to start moving that pendulum of the heart.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I think that it's imperative that we have those conversations when there isn't a person of color in the room, because there's an authenticity or that happens when we're not in the room, and that's when that allyship and that advocacy really step forward and take center mass, because we a lot of times we're not at the tables and our students are at the tables where decisions are being made. And so when we're not in the rooms, that's when we need our allies to speak up. And it's absolutely important that it happens when there's only one or two POCs. And we had a navigating racial trauma panel the other day. I'm gonna say this and then move forward. And one of the things that one of our panelists has said is that those who are the POCs in the room should not have the expectation to hold the banner of POC. And I think it's not only on the POC not to hold the banner, but it's also on the professor not to expect that POC to hold the banner for that minority perspective. So it goes both ways. We have 2 minutes left, and I have to apologize because we went a little long. And so what I'm going to do is we didn't get an opportunity to share our SHARP framework. So what I'll do is, to our attendees, I'll send out a email that has that framework in it and explanation, actual presentation, so that you can walk your way through it. And then if you have any questions, or if you would like for us to actually set up some time to talk to you a little bit more about the underpinnings of that framework, we in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion would absolutely be happy to do it. I am going to flash it really quickly so that those who are joining us are able to see it. But it's a very simple framework that has everything to do with building those relationships that came up earlier. So this idea of seeing and acknowledging that race and ethnicity matter, hearing what the students are saying, whether you understand it or anticipate what they're going to say, asking, reaching out to the students and not assuming that they're okay or that they're not okay. A lot of times we expect for students or people of color to be affected in some type of way by an incident, and that may not be the case. Respecting where your students are emotionally. And I think that this piece is so important, because this framework doesn't just work for our minority students, but it works for any student that you see. So respecting where your students are. So that means that if your students are in a place of acceptance and in a place of like, then understanding if your student is in a place of denial, understanding and respecting that as well. And then also just being patient with the students. So meeting the students wherever they are. We hear that term all the time, meeting your students where they are. So being authentic in those relationship buildings. So as I said, I'll actually send this out to our attendees so that you're able to dive a little bit deeper into how this SHARP framework actually manifests when we speak with our students. Again, I'll share that with you. I do want to say, as we come to a close, before I do that, Liz, Ms. Debra, Kristen, do either of you have any last or final thoughts?
There are several podcasts that I think, again, because I think we're all in the process of always trying to catch up on our history, because it hasn't been given to us truthfully. But some of those, 1619 is a great podcast that if I had to recommend someone just start off with a podcast, maybe that would be a great one. Ta-Nehisi Coates' writings, Kendi, his book Stamped from the Beginning, all three of them now, any of those to just kind of dive right in and just learn. Education is really where we absolutely have to drive our continuing direction as to how this social movement, where the social needle will end up with this movement in this decade at this time.
Mr. Coleman?
Mine is pretty clear. If you want to see the work move forward, then you have to contribute to it. And so that can start today. That can start, it can start today. You can start tomorrow, but it has to eventually happen if you want to see the change. That's it.
As professionals, oh, I'm sorry. As professionals, we develop all the time, right? We work, we make sure we're sharp. We make sure we know the latest things. We need to do the work. We need to do all of the work. If we are supporting our students, we have to dig in and we have to learn.
Absolutely. Thank you all so very much. I do want to say that the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, in collaboration with Inclusive Community, will be hosting a panel next Wednesday entitled #Home is Here, a panel discussion on DACA. And I encourage all of those who are interested to be on the lookout for registration for that. We are currently working with a dynamic panel that I swear you'll want to hear from. So please continue to engage with us and have conversations with us, because social work and social justice work isn't just about Black Lives Matter, but it's about all of our lives, and not all lives, but certainly those lives that are often marginalized, that they matter as well. Thank you all so very much for joining us. We hope that you found a value added, and we will be in touch shortly.